It's a warm summer morning in a quiet town nestled on the edge of a dense, whispering forest in the Pacific Northwest. Birds are chirping, the air smells like dew and pine, and somewhere in the distance, a young girl is saddling up her horse for what seems like an ordinary ride. She waves to her mom with that carefree smile only a teenager can wear, full of dreams, untouched by the world's shadows. But that wave, it would be the last time her mother ever saw her. Because just a few hours later, both the girl and her horse vanished into those woods without a trace. No screams. No signs of struggle. Just silence. And then nothing. For 8 long years. Until one day, that same mother, still grieving and holding on to hope, attends a rodeo, and what she sees in the arena nearly makes her collapse. Because there, under the spotlight, is a young woman riding a horse. And for a split second, she's sure that's her daughter. Now hold up, because I know your heart just skipped a beat. I promise you, you're not going to want to miss where this story goes. You're here for one reason, to find out what really happened. Was the girl taken? Did she run away? Was it something darker? Or could it be something far more unbelievable? Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have the answer you came here for, and more than that, you'll walk away questioning just how much we really know about the people we lose. So grab your drink, silence those notifications, and lock in, because what I'm about to share with you isn't just another missing person story. This is a journey into a mother's unbreakable love, a daughter's hidden world, and a truth that stunned everyone who heard it. Let's be real, stories like this hit different. Not because they're sensational, but because they touch something deep inside us. The fear of losing someone, the impossible hope of getting them back, the haunting mystery of not knowing. And when it's your child, that kind of pain doesn't fade. It doesn't heal. It just hides behind your eyes every time you look into the woods and wonder what they're keeping. For years, the mother in this story, we'll call her Rachel, kept returning to the same trailhead her daughter disappeared from. She left notes, tied ribbons to trees, held out her hand, hoping for a miracle. She wasn't alone either. Locals whispered about the forest, said it wasn't just deep, but ancient, that it didn't give back what it took. Some claimed they heard hooves at night, running through the brush with no rider. Others said they saw shadows too large to be deer, but too fast to be human. But nothing ever led to answers. Until now. And let's talk about the daughter for a second, Olivia. Just 16 years old, but already so in tune with her horse, Ember, that people swore they had their own language. She wasn't some runaway or troublemaker. No drugs. No bad crowd. Just a girl who loved animals, nature, and the quiet freedom that only the forest could give her. That's what made it all so bizarre. There was no sign of foul play, no note, no evidence of any kind. Search parties combed every inch of the woods. Dogs, drones, helicopters, you name it. And yet nothing. It was as if the earth just swallowed her. And the more time passed, the more the town leaned toward the painful truth. Olivia and Ember were gone. Gone for good. But here's where things take a turn you will not see coming. Because 8 years later, Rachel attends a rodeo 2 states away, not to forget, but to feel close to Olivia. Horses always reminded her of her daughter. The way they moved, the bond they had with their riders. She went for comfort, not closure. But when the final event of the night begins, and a young woman in a wide-brimmed hat and braids gallops out onto the dirt, something clicks. The way she holds the reins, the tilt of her head, the fire in that horse's eyes. Rachel stands. Her heart's pounding. The crowd is cheering, but all she can hear is her own breath. Because she swears that's not just any rider. That's Olivia. And that horse, it's Ember. Older, yes, but unmistakable. Now ask yourself, what would you do if someone you thought was gone forever suddenly appeared in front of you? Alive. Well, but acting like they don't even know you? Because that's exactly what Rachel faces. When she pushes through the crowd, calls out her daughter's name, the young woman just stares. No recognition. No reaction. Just cold, practiced distance. So who is she really? And where has she been for all these years? What secrets lie behind that stare? Stick with me, because this story is about to unravel like a mystery novel you can't put down. There are twists you won't see coming, truths more haunting than any rumor, and a resolution that will leave you speechless. And yes, you're going to find out exactly what happened in that forest. Why Olivia vanished, why no one could find her, and how a rodeo, of all places, became the stage for a reunion that stunned the country. But right now, we're just getting started. So whatever you do, don't click away. The truth is waiting, and it's deeper than you ever imagined. Rachel had always believed that if she ever saw her daughter again, it would be this overwhelming, tear-filled, embrace-heavy moment where all the pain melted away in one miraculous second. But reality hit different. Standing near the edge of the rodeo arena, her hands trembling and voice cracking as she shouted Olivia, she expected something, anything in return. But what she got was nothing but a brief, neutral glance from the young woman atop that chestnut mare. Not confusion, not recognition, just detachment, cold and sharp like glass. It sent a chill racing through Rachel's spine. Her daughter, or someone who looked exactly like her, had locked eyes with her mother and shown no sign that she knew who she was. But that couldn't be possible. Could it? The woman riding Ember, because yes, the horse was unmistakably Ember, right down to the white blaze across her forehead, was going by the name Lena. According to the rodeo announcer, she was a drifter, a skilled horse trainer who'd spent the past year traveling across small-town circuits from Oregon to Colorado. She was known for keeping to herself, never staying in one place too long, always disappearing after each event. No permanent address, no family listed on her paperwork. Just a girl and her horse, appearing out of nowhere like a ghost from an unsolved mystery. The moment Rachel heard that name, her instincts screamed that something wasn't right. This wasn't just some eerie coincidence. But when she tried to approach Lena backstage, security turned her away. She doesn't talk to fans, one staff member said. She's private. A little intense. Another added, some say she's running from something. And that's when things really started to spiral into the unknown. Back in her hotel room that night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, scrolling through every online forum, every Facebook group tied to missing persons, lost teens, horse riding communities, anything that might have a clue. She uploaded a screenshot of the rodeo's live stream to one of the largest true crime subreddits with a caption, "Is this my missing daughter?" Within hours, her post exploded. Thousands of comments poured in, some supportive, others skeptical, and a few from users claiming they'd seen Lena before in small towns, working on farms, or riding in underground horse racing circuits. But no one knew her real origin. And, more chilling, no one ever saw her without the horse. Reddit detectives, YouTube true crime commentators, and TikTok sleuths started digging. One popular channel known for cracking cold cases picked up the story and dubbed it the Olivia Rodeo Riddle. It climbed to the top of trending. Hashtag Missing Girl Mystery and hashtag Is She Olivia started spreading like wildfire. Still, no one could confirm anything. The rodeo tour management didn't respond to press inquiries. Lena didn't post on social media. And then a curious detail surfaced. The horse wasn't microchipped. For a competition-level animal, that was a huge red flag. No registration. No owner's history. Nothing. Almost as if the pair had been living off the grid for years. But that just raised more questions than answers. Who was sheltering her? Why was she hiding her identity? And how had she survived so long without anyone discovering the truth? Rachel's attempts to reach out to law enforcement were met with polite dismissal. The girl in question was an adult now, traveling freely, and she wasn't committing any crimes. The authorities had long closed the case, filed under missing, presumed dead. But Rachel wasn't backing down. She started making calls, pulling in favors from friends of friends, old reporters who had once covered Olivia's disappearance. And eventually, she found someone who was willing to help. A retired private investigator named Tom Callahan, a former cop with a reputation for solving cold cases that others gave up on. Tom didn't promise miracles, but he said something that stuck. If your gut tells you that's your daughter, then I'll follow that trail until we know the truth. As Tom started piecing together sightings, a pattern began to emerge. Lena had indeed been seen before. In small border towns, always passing through. She'd worked at a stable in Utah for a month before vanishing overnight. Then she was spotted in northern Idaho, training a wild Mustang no one else could handle. One farm owner said she spoke very little, but seemed to know exactly how to calm any animal. "She's got that old soul vibe," he'd said. "Like she's seen some serious things." But the more people described her, the more contradictions arose. Some said she was quiet and reserved. Others described her as paranoid, even confrontational when asked personal questions. And one woman claimed she had an entirely different name back then, Sarah, not Lena. Now that's when things got really strange. Who was she really? Was she Olivia, suffering from amnesia or trauma-induced identity loss? Or was she someone else entirely, wearing another person's face and riding a horse that shouldn't even be alive after all these years? Tom began digging into reports of runaways and foster care facilities in the years following Olivia's disappearance, and found something odd. Records of a girl who matched Olivia's physical description had checked into a mental health clinic under a false name in Oregon, and vanished again weeks later, without a trace. No discharge. No forwarding address. Nothing. Meanwhile, Rachel started receiving anonymous emails. At first, they were vague, warnings to stop digging and to leave her alone. But then they turned personal. The messages referenced memories only Rachel and Olivia would have known, like the name of Olivia's childhood stuffed animal, or a nickname her father used to call her before he passed away. Rachel was rattled. Who was watching her? And why were they trying so hard to keep the truth buried? As the days went on, the pressure mounted. Rachel's world had flipped upside down. One minute she was preparing to live the rest of her life with only memories of her daughter, and the next, she was staring into the eyes of a young woman who looked exactly like her, only with no recognition and an entire life she couldn't explain. Was she brainwashed? Was she part of something bigger? Cult theories began to emerge online. Some viewers pointed to the isolation, the secrecy, the way she seemed emotionally numb. Others brought up the possibility of human trafficking. Perhaps she'd escaped, but had to reinvent herself to stay hidden. But then another detail surfaced that threw everything into chaos again. Someone found a blurry photo from 8 years ago, a wildlife camera taken deep in the same forest Olivia vanished from. And in the corner of the image, barely visible, was what looked like a young girl riding bareback on a horse. No trail. No gear. No expression on her face. The timestamp? Just 2 weeks after Olivia disappeared. And that's where the story begins to unravel in ways no one could have imagined. Because now, it's not just a question of where Olivia has been. It's a question of what she became while she was gone and who or what may have been out there with her. Tom Callahan had been in the game long enough to know when something wasn't adding up, and right now, nothing in this story was playing fair. He'd just returned from a quiet visit to a stable in southern Montana where Lena had supposedly stayed a few months back. The owner remembered her vividly, said she worked hard, spoke little, and was fiercely protective of her horse, never letting anyone else touch it. But what struck Tom most wasn't her behavior. It was the stable's security footage, or rather, the sudden lack of it. The stable had a top-tier surveillance system, covering every angle of the grounds, yet the week Lena was there, the hard drive had been wiped. No backup. No files. Just a silent gap in time. The owner shrugged it off as technical failure. Tom didn't buy it. And he wasn't the only one growing uneasy. Rachel, meanwhile, had started noticing things, little things at first. A car parked down the block with out-of-state plates that showed up 3 days in a row. A voicemail left on her landline with no voice, only the distant sound of hooves. And then, someone broke into her home. Not to steal, but to erase. The only photo she still had of Olivia on Ember, the one framed on her mantle, was gone. Not disturbed. Just gone. Everything else in the house was untouched. Her laptop had been powered on, and a few folders looked tampered with. But no fingerprints. No broken locks. Just quiet, calculated removal. Someone wasn't just watching her. They were actively trying to control what she could prove. That's when it stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like a conspiracy. And yet, amid the chaos, something new surfaced, an old journal, tucked away in a box of Olivia's childhood things. Rachel had forgotten about it, but there it was, buried under layers of dusty keepsakes. Most of it was what you'd expect from a teen girl: sketches of horses, scribbled dreams of becoming a vet, entries about her best friend Melissa and the way she hated gym class. But then, buried between the pages, was an entry that didn't make sense. It was dated just 3 days before Olivia disappeared and read, "He said I'm ready. He said it's time. I'm scared but excited. I just hope Mom understands one day." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. He? Who was he? Olivia had never mentioned a boyfriend, and Rachel would have noticed if she'd been sneaking off to meet someone. But that journal entry had weight, like it wasn't just about a secret crush or a teenage prank. It sounded like a plan. Something Olivia knew she wasn't supposed to share. Tom ran the journal's handwriting through his contacts at the sheriff's department to make sure it wasn't forged. It wasn't. It was real. But the sheriff's response was what raised the most eyebrows. "Look, Tom," he said, lowering his voice, "some of us think that girl didn't just vanish. We think someone helped her disappear." That's when he slid a file across the table, one that had been quietly buried years ago, never made public. It was an incident report filed by a neighbor of Rachel's. The woman claimed to have seen a man visiting Olivia regularly in the months before her disappearance. Late at night, sometimes with a trailer, always keeping his face down. And when the neighbor tried to follow him one evening, her car's tires were slashed. The report was never investigated. The officer who filed it transferred 2 weeks later and never followed up. Now, a new name surfaced: Jack Corbin, a former horse trainer with a questionable past, bounced from job to job across the Northwest, always fired for personality clashes or boundary issues. He'd been hired at Olivia's riding school the summer before she vanished, but was let go after just 6 weeks. The record said he moved on. But there were whispers. He was obsessed with one of the girls. And some staff suspected it was Olivia. When Tom looked him up, Jack had seemingly fallen off the map in 2017. No address. No employment. Nothing but an old P.O. box in northern Wyoming. Was he the he Olivia wrote about? And if so, was he dead, in hiding, or still pulling the strings? Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that someone close to her had known more than they let on. So she reached out to Melissa, Olivia's best friend back in the day, now living in Boise and working as a veterinary tech. At first, Melissa seemed surprised to hear from Rachel. Said she'd thought about Olivia over the years, even lit a candle for her birthday every year since she vanished. But the longer they talked, the more Rachel picked up on something off. When Rachel mentioned the journal, Melissa went quiet. Dead quiet. Then she said, "I never told anyone this, but Olivia came to my house the night before she disappeared. She was crying. Said she couldn't stay at home anymore. Said he would come for her soon. I thought she was just being dramatic, but now I don't know." Why didn't Melissa say anything back then? Why had she waited all this time? Rachel pressed, and Melissa finally admitted she had tried, but someone came to her door a few days later. A man she didn't recognize. Tall, wearing a ball cap and a jacket with no logo. He told her to stay out of it. That Olivia was safe and no one needed to get hurt. Melissa had been terrified ever since. And just when it felt like things couldn't get stranger, Tom received a letter. No return address, no name, just a short message scrawled in shaky handwriting. "You're looking in the wrong direction. She didn't vanish. She was chosen." Attached to the note was a photograph, grainy, black and white, taken at night. It showed a circle of figures standing in the woods, lit by torchlight, with what looked like a horse standing motionless in the center. In the background, barely visible, was the shape of a girl. Eyes closed. Face peaceful, like she was waiting for something. The photo was dated July 17th, 2016, the exact day Olivia vanished. And with that, the story shifted again. What had started as a desperate search for a lost daughter was now something much darker, much deeper, and maybe, just maybe, not entirely human. The photo, grainy, chilling, and almost too surreal to be real, rattled Tom more than he let on. That torchlit circle in the woods wasn't something you found in your average missing persons case. It had the feel of something older, ritualistic, deeply disturbing. But what made it worse was that Olivia didn't look scared. She looked calm, voluntarily part of whatever was happening. That detail kept gnawing at him as he sat alone in his office, the photo laid out under a desk lamp like a crime scene relic. Rachel, still reeling from the journal discovery and Melissa's confession, had fallen silent on the other end of the phone when he described it. And in that silence, something shifted. No longer just fear or confusion, but a creeping dread that this wasn't just about a girl who ran away. It was about a girl who was taken, but not in the way anyone had expected. But the story wasn't done unraveling. Just as Rachel tried to process the implications of that photo, someone else was pulled into the spiral. Ethan, Olivia's cousin, had mostly stayed out of the spotlight all these years. He was a few years older, had been away at college when Olivia vanished, and though the family leaned on each other during that time, Ethan had always seemed detached from the pain. But now, for the first time in years, he reached out to Rachel. He had received something in the mail. No return address. No explanation. Just an envelope with a charred scrap of a riding ribbon, the kind Olivia used to win at local horse shows. It was burned at the edges, the middle still intact enough to see the embossed gold lettering. Second place, Timberwood Trails. Olivia had won that ribbon 3 months before she disappeared. And yet it had vanished during the police search of her belongings. Everyone assumed it had been lost or destroyed. Now it was back, and it smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Ethan wasn't a superstitious guy. He'd studied data science, worked in tech, and believed in logic above all else. But he admitted to Rachel that the ribbon shook him, not just because of what it was, but because of the timing. 2 nights before it arrived, Ethan had a dream, one he swore felt more like a memory than a nightmare. In it, he was back at Timberwood, standing at the edge of the forest. Olivia was there, but not as a child. She looked exactly like the girl from the Rodeo livestream. She didn't speak, just pointed toward the trees and mouthed something he couldn't understand. And behind her, that same chestnut horse stood completely still, its eyes reflecting the moonlight in a way that didn't seem natural. It felt like a warning, Ethan said quietly. But I don't know for what. Now, Rachel was shaken all over again. Because when Olivia had first gone missing, she too had dreamed of her daughter. Every night for 2 weeks, Rachel swore she saw Olivia running, always deeper into the woods, never looking back. Some nights she'd turn and smile, like she was safe and happy. Others, she looked terrified, trapped. Rachel had chalked it up to grief. But now, with Ethan having similar dreams, years apart, both strangely specific, something didn't feel coincidental. Especially not when, hours after receiving the ribbon, Ethan's apartment was broken into. Nothing taken. Nothing trashed. Just the smoke-scented ribbon, gone again. As if someone had needed him to see it, but not hold on to it. Tom tried running a forensic test on the photo, but no lab would touch it. Unverified source, they said. Not a criminal case. He even reached out to a contact at a private lab, who agreed to take a look, but the sample was returned 2 days later with a note that read, "This isn't a photo. It's a print from a thermal imaging camera. Night vision, military grade." Someone with high-level equipment was watching that forest. That revelation opened a whole new can of worms. Why would anyone be monitoring Olivia? Who had the capability to set up surveillance like that in such a remote area? And why hadn't that image surfaced sooner? Tom started tracing who might have had access to that kind of gear, and a familiar name popped up, an ex-military survivalist named Caleb Danner, who ran a wilderness training camp not far from where Olivia disappeared. Caleb had been questioned early on during the investigation, but was dismissed after providing a solid alibi. Still, rumors had followed him for years. Some said his camp went beyond survival training, that he dabbled in fringe belief systems, used rituals to test his students, and had been kicked out of a veterans group for pushing conspiracy theories about mind control and the spiritual merging of man and nature. And one more thing, he owned horses. Several of them. all unregistered, all off the grid. Rachel begged Tom to confront him, but Tom knew better than to storm in without proof. So instead, he reached out quietly to a journalist friend who had once embedded with Danner's camp for a short-lived docuseries. The journalist, Lisa, agreed to help, said she'd been dying to blow the lid off Danner for years, but was too afraid to go back. Still, she offered one chilling piece of insight. He talks about chosen children. Believes some kids are born with this wild frequency, as he puts it, closer to nature, better attuned to animal consciousness. He thinks they can become part of the forest. It's insane stuff. But he swears he's met a girl who proved it. Said she returned to him from the trees. I thought it was nonsense. But now, I don't know. Lisa also mentioned that Danner used to carry a photo in his pocket. Said it was a sign. A girl on a horse, emerging from the mist. She never saw the photo up close, but she remembered one thing clearly. The girl had a white streak in her hair. Rachel's heart nearly stopped. Olivia had developed that same streak in middle school, just a single lock, running from her temple down past her ear. People always said it made her look like a character out of a fairy tale. That small, unique feature had always made her easy to recognize. And now it was showing up in places that shouldn't even know she existed. But the biggest twist came days later, when Tom received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. The message contained only one thing, a video clip less than 20 seconds long. It was grainy and distorted, but the content was unmistakable. It showed Olivia, or someone who looked exactly like her, standing in a shallow creek in the woods, her hands raised toward the horse. And behind her, just barely visible in the trees, was another figure, a man watching, unmoving, face obscured. The video cut out just as the horse started to rear back and whinny, as if spooked by something unseen. The timestamp? It was dated 2 weeks before the rodeo. Someone had been following her long before Rachel ever laid eyes on her again. And just like that, everything they thought they knew about Olivia's reappearance, her motives, and even her identity began to unravel. Because if she was being watched, controlled, or even hunted, then she wasn't just lost. She was in danger. Or worse, she was part of something she couldn't escape. Rachel had always believed that the worst moment of her life had already come and gone, the day Olivia disappeared. But as she sat in her kitchen, staring at the dim glow of her phone screen while her coffee went cold in her trembling hands, she realized that grief had a way of disguising the real terror. Losing someone was one thing, but knowing they were still out there, wrapped inside a twisted, unraveling mystery with invisible hands pulling the strings, that was something far more harrowing. The video had left a weight on her chest she couldn't shake. That wasn't just Olivia standing in that creek. That was her daughter, alive, unaged, and somehow suspended in a moment that should never have been possible. And the figure in the background, the faceless watcher, had imprinted itself deep into Rachel's mind. She could still see it when she closed her eyes. It didn't feel like someone watching. It felt like someone claiming. That night, Rachel barely slept. Every creak in the hallway, every passing headlight spilling across her living room curtains made her stomach twist. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. And then, around 3:20 a.m., the silence was broken. Her landline rang once and stopped. No caller ID, no voicemail, just a single ring. Rachel's heart pounded in her ears as she walked to the window and peered through the blinds. There was nothing outside, no cars, no movement. Just the same old stillness of the neighborhood. But something was different. She couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe it was the lingering sense that something had just moved out of view. Maybe it was that faint smell of smoke again, like burned pine wood, coming from somewhere near her front porch. The next morning, things escalated. Rachel's car, which she had parked as usual in her driveway, was sitting with every door wide open. Nothing was missing. Her wallet was still inside. Even the loose change in the cup holder hadn't been touched. But on the driver's seat was a single horsehair braid. Tight. Clean. Perfectly knotted. It hadn't been there the night before. She hadn't even opened the car. And yet someone had gotten close enough to make their presence known. Someone who didn't want to rob her, but to send her a message, You're already in it too deep. Panicked, she called Tom. But the call went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him. He was meticulous, always available, always wired in. So she tried again. Nothing. By the fourth attempt, dread started to seep in like ice water down her spine. She grabbed her keys and drove to his office, only to find the door slightly ajar and his car parked out front. The place had been tossed. Not violently, but surgically. Desk drawers pulled out, files skimmed through, computers still on but accessed. A single sticky note sat on the desk, completely blank. No sign of Tom. No blood. No struggle. Just absence, intentional and cold. Rachel stood there in the middle of the room, heart racing, when her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. From an unknown number. No words. Just a photo. A screenshot from a security camera. It showed her, standing in Tom's office, right now. Whoever sent it was watching her. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. They were actually watching her, and in real time. That moment shattered whatever illusion of safety Rachel had left. She backed out of the office slowly, scanning every rooftop, every parked car, every tree branch that could be hiding a lens. She felt like prey. Hunted. Stalked. Driving away, she didn't go home. She didn't know where to go. She stopped at a gas station on the edge of town and locked herself in the restroom, her hands shaking too much to hold her phone straight. She tried calling Melissa, hoping for something familiar. But the call didn't go through. Number temporarily out of service, the message said. That was impossible. She had just spoken to her days ago. Desperate, she called again. Still nothing. She scoured social media, her heart sinking as she realized Melissa's profiles had vanished. No posts, no photos, not even a digital footprint. Like she'd never existed. A sinking, nauseating suspicion formed in her gut. First Tom, now Melissa? Who was next? And yet, buried beneath the fear, a deeper emotion had started to fester, paranoia. Rachel couldn't help but question everyone now. The sheriff who downplayed the early reports. The stable owner who conveniently lost security footage. Even Ethan, who claimed to receive a dream and a ribbon that vanished just as mysteriously as it appeared. Were they all being manipulated? Or worse, were some of them in on it? She hated the thought, but it clung to her brain like static. Trust was no longer a given. Every memory, every conversation, every sideways glance from the people around her, suddenly it all felt laced with ulterior motives. As she sat in the locked restroom stall, knees drawn to her chest, Rachel's mind spiraled through theories, none of which made her feel any safer. What if Olivia hadn't just vanished into the woods? What if she'd been given to something? A group? A belief system? A purpose no one had the words for? And what if now, years later, that same force was reaching out again? Not to return Olivia, but to warn Rachel to stop. Then the lights flickered. Not once. 3 times. Click, click, click. She froze. The buzzing fluorescent glow above her stuttered, then dimmed for just a heartbeat too long before stabilizing. It could have been nothing. Old wiring. Bad ballast. But it didn't feel like nothing. Especially not when her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number. This time it was a video. Just 5 seconds long. A close-up shot of Ember, the horse. Eyes wide, nostrils flaring, mane braided the same way as the one left on her car seat. Behind the horse, someone whispered something barely audible. Rachel rewound it over and over, adjusting the volume until the whisper came through, clearer and clearer. You weren't supposed to keep looking. And just like that, Rachel realized she wasn't chasing a mystery anymore. She was being dragged into one. The motel Rachel ended up in was the kind of place you only stayed when there were no other options. Off the interstate, dimly lit with buzzing neon signage, and a check-in desk that doubled as a cigarette stand. But it was quiet, and for the first time in days, Rachel felt the faintest breath of calm until she opened her email. Nestled between junk mail and a promotional message from her bank was one titled simply, "You missed it." No sender name. No return address. Against her better judgment, she clicked. A video began to play automatically, grainy and silent. It was a news segment from the night Olivia went missing, one Rachel had seen a dozen times. She almost closed it until she noticed something that made her stomach flip. Behind the news anchor, through the window of the sheriff's office, stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a deputy's uniform. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was what was in his hand. He was holding a child's red ribbon. Olivia's ribbon. The same one that had been found days later near the stables, supposedly discovered by a local hiker. The timeline didn't make sense. That ribbon had been missing when the video aired. No one had reported finding it until nearly 2 weeks later. But here it was, plain as day, clutched in the deputy's hand before it had even been found. Rachel froze the frame and zoomed in, trying to make sense of the image. Then she saw the badge number. It belonged to Deputy Hayes, the same man who led the original search. The same man who'd quietly retired 2 years after Olivia disappeared. The same man who had shown up at her door last summer, offering to check in after rumors of sightings began to circulate online. He had stood in her kitchen, drank her coffee, and told her it was time to let go. Now it looked like he might have been hiding something the entire time. Rachel's thoughts raced. Was he just covering up bad police work? Or had he been involved from the start? The questions tumbled like dominoes, but the answers remained locked just out of reach. That night, she found herself driving toward the only place that might still hold some piece of the puzzle, the sheriff's storage facility. It was off the books. Tom had mentioned it in passing before he vanished, and it was supposedly where all unsolved case evidence was boxed and forgotten. She broke in with a stolen keycard from the station's backup locker, heart hammering with every creak of the old door. What she found inside wasn't just shocking. It was impossible. Among the boxes labeled Olivia Jensen, Case 243B, was a dusty, unopened envelope marked, "Do not process, hold." Inside it was a flash drive and a printed photo, blurry, black and white, but unmistakable. Olivia, again, standing in the woods, but this time, she wasn't alone. Next to her, holding her hand, was a woman. Long hair, familiar posture. Rachel's knees buckled. It was her. She was in the photo. Olivia's mother. But the timestamp on the back read June 16th, 2017, 4 years after Olivia vanished. Rachel had no memory of that day. Nothing that could explain how this picture could even exist. No one had taken that photo. She certainly hadn't been there. Had it been doctored? Had someone manipulated it? Or had she been made to forget? She inserted the flash drive into a dusty laptop and waited. It contained only one file, an audio recording, staticky and clipped. A voice, male, older, spoke in a hushed whisper. Test phase 3 was successful. Subject remains compliant. Maternal anchor observed responding to auditory stimulus. Memory fracturing consistent with preconditioning. Recommend continuation of psychological distance until reactivation. Rachel's mouth went dry. It sounded clinical, inhuman, like someone treating people, her, Olivia, as subjects in some kind of experiment. But what experiment? And who was running it? Just as her mind began connecting the chilling dots, a voice behind her whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." She spun around, flashlight trembling, and there he was, Deputy Hayes. But he didn't look surprised. He looked tired, like someone who had been waiting for this moment for years. "They told me you'd come," he said quietly. "I told them you were too stubborn. That grief would keep you frozen, not curious. I was wrong." Rachel backed away, throat tight with fear, her thoughts a swirl of panic and confusion. "Who are they?" she asked, voice barely steady. He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he stepped aside, and behind him stood someone she hadn't seen in years. Someone who shouldn't have been there at all. Melissa. Alive. Eyes heavy, face blank, and whispering the same phrase over and over. "She doesn't remember. She doesn't remember. She doesn't remember." Rachel reached out, but Melissa flinched. Hayes placed a firm hand on Melissa's shoulder and said, "We tried to keep the memories buried. We had to. You don't understand what's at stake." Rachel's world shattered again in that instant. The ribbon, The footage, the missing friends, the dreams, the haunting braid, it all pointed to something much larger than a disappearance. This wasn't a case of a lost child. It wasn't even about a mother trying to find her daughter. It was about someone trying to erase the truth from everyone who dared to remember it. And now that Rachel had remembered, fully, there was no going back. Rachel stood in the sterile cold of the evidence facility, the heavy air suffocating her like a thick fog pressing down on her chest. Her heart pounded like a war drum in her ears as Melissa, her childhood friend, her confidant, stood in front of her, whispering that same phrase again and again like a broken record caught in a loop. She doesn't remember. She doesn't remember. And yet now, Rachel did remember. She remembered that day in the woods, faint and flickering like an old VHS tape, but real, frighteningly real. Olivia, clutching her hand. A sharp, high-pitched tone that made her nauseous. Something being whispered in her ear in a voice she never wanted to hear again. Then, blackness. Rachel had always thought she passed out from grief, maybe even shock. But now, standing here, with Deputy Hayes silently observing like a man at the edge of a cliff, she knew better. Something had been done to her. Intentionally.
Surgically.
And whatever it was, it had left more than holes in her memory. It had left ghosts in her life that she could no longer ignore. She turned to Hayes, her voice cracking under the weight of the moment. What did you do to her?
To me.
He hesitated, the lines around his eyes deepening as if the answer physically hurt to give. We didn't want to hurt anyone, he said, his tone laced with a weary resignation. It was about control, about peace. Olivia was never supposed to be taken. She was supposed to be saved. Rachel's head snapped back.
Saved?
The word rattled in her mind like a ricochet. Saved from what? From whom? The man who once consoled her in her living room now stood between her and the truth like a brick wall, and the betrayal burned worse than any lie ever could. Then came the ultimatum. Hayes stepped forward and laid a manila envelope on the table. Inside, he said, is everything.
Names. Dates.
Coordinates. All of it. But if you take it, you can't come back. You can't see Melissa again. You won't be allowed near Olivia. And worst of all, you'll put her in danger. There are people watching. They don't want the story told. They want it buried. And they'll bury you too, Rachel. Alongside anyone who helps you dig. The words hung in the air like the final moments before a storm. It wasn't just a threat. It was a decision that would change everything. If she walked away now, she could go back to her life. A hollow life, yes, but safe. Quiet. Invisible. But if she opened that envelope, she was declaring war on something much larger than a family mystery. She'd be stepping into a world where memories were tampered with, people disappeared without trace, and the ones pulling the strings wore the uniforms of allies. Rachel looked at Melissa, who had stopped whispering now and stood glassy-eyed, as if waiting to be activated again. It gutted her. The friend she loved, the woman who had shared her darkest days, had become a pawn in something sinister, and Rachel had never noticed. But the thing that twisted like a knife wasn't just Melissa's vacant stare. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, someone close to her had known and said nothing. And when she pulled away from Hayes, when she left the facility under the suffocating weight of all that unanswered horror, her instincts screamed louder than they ever had before. There was still someone watching her, guiding her, but it wasn't Hayes. Back in her car, she flipped open her phone and did something she hadn't done in years. She called Ethan. He answered after the second ring, his voice low and careful. I figured you'd be calling soon, he said, no surprise in his tone. Rachel went cold. You knew, she said, all this time. Silence followed, long and heavy, before he finally replied. Not everything. Just enough to know you'd end up right where you are now. The implication hit her like a freight train. Ethan hadn't just seen the ribbon or dreamt about Olivia. He'd been part of it. Maybe not willingly, maybe not with full knowledge, but enough to know the truth would come back like a ghost in a mirror. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, the betrayal turning her voice into glass. Because, he said slowly, I thought I could protect you. I thought if I kept you in the dark, you'd be safe.
But now,
I think it's too late for that. Rachel's mind spiraled. Nothing was solid anymore. Every memory felt like a fabrication. Every face around her, a mask. The people she trusted most, Hayes, Ethan, maybe even Melissa, had all kept her boxed inside a reality that no longer held shape. And the worst part was that she still didn't know why. Why Olivia? Why her? Why now, after 8 years of silence, were the pieces falling back into place like a puzzle she never agreed to solve? That night, she sat in her hotel room with the envelope on the bed in front of her, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. But before she could even break the seal, a knock at the door made her freeze. Not a hard knock. Not urgent. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps. She waited. Another 3 taps. Exactly the same. She crept to the peephole, heart hammering, breath shallow. There was no one there. She opened the door. And at her feet was a single Polaroid photograph. It was Olivia, smiling, standing beside someone she couldn't quite see because that part of the photo had been burned away. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked up the singed Polaroid from the hallway floor, the faint scent of burnt film clinging to her fingers. Olivia's smile in the photo wasn't the wide-eyed grin of a child lost and afraid. It was calm, self-assured, and deeply unsettling. Her daughter looked older than she should have, as if time hadn't passed normally for her. As if she'd grown up in some invisible corner of the world while Rachel tore herself apart searching. But it wasn't just Olivia's expression that shattered her. It was the half-burned figure beside her, the outline of an adult standing so close it implied intimacy, protection, maybe even control. Rachel tried to focus on the remaining corner of the photo, and there it was, barely legible through the ash. A government insignia. Not military. Not law enforcement. Something unfamiliar, but unmistakably official. The reality crashed down on her like a wave. This wasn't just about Olivia. It wasn't just about one missing girl or a family torn apart by grief. This was part of something broader, deliberate, orchestrated, and buried under layers of false truths and planted memories. The missing children, the unexplained sightings, the fractured recollections. This was a program, a project, and it had roots stretching far beyond her small town, into agencies that had no name and records that had been scrubbed from existence. She thought of the email, the flash drive, the voice that said, "Subject remains compliant." Olivia hadn't just been taken. She'd been conditioned, trained, or worse, reprogrammed. Desperate for answers, Rachel turned to the one place she swore she'd never revisit, her late husband's journal. After his death, she couldn't bear to read more than a page or 2. But now, the fragments of his paranoia made horrifying sense. Late-night phone calls with no voice on the other end. The panic attacks he blamed on guilt. The torn pages that referenced theta subjects and something called Project Echo. Rachel flipped through the worn pages until she found one dated 2 months before Olivia disappeared. It read, "They warned me, said the less I knew, the safer we'd be. But I made the mistake of digging anyway. I think they're watching Olivia. She's too smart, too aware. She sees too much." It wasn't grief that killed him. It was fear. Fueled by adrenaline and fury, Rachel drove straight to Ethan's house. She banged on the door until he opened it, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. She held up the photo. "You knew she was alive." He didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in, closing the door behind them with slow finality. "I was told I'd never see her again if I said anything," he muttered. "They came to me when you were in the hospital after your breakdown. Said if I helped them manage you, they'd let her go eventually. That she'd be given a chance at a normal life." The betrayal struck like a blade to the ribs. "Manage me?" she hissed. "You mean lie to me?
Gaslight me.
Make me think I was crazy?" Ethan's voice cracked. "They said you'd unravel everything. That they had to be sure she wasn't." He paused, eyes watering. "Contaminated?" Rachel recoiled. Contaminated by what?
But he wouldn't say.
Or maybe he didn't know. Before she could demand more, her phone buzzed again. A text this time. No number. Just an address and a time. Midnight. A rural location outside of town she hadn't heard of in years. Old Pine Station. It had been shut down since the early 2000s. A decommissioned emergency broadcast site. Her gut told her it wasn't a trap, it was the endgame. That night, Rachel drove alone, flashlight in hand, adrenaline giving her a false sense of courage as she pulled into the overgrown lot. The building loomed like a corpse of the Cold War, windowless and gray. But as she entered through a side door pried open with a crowbar, she realized she wasn't the only one there. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, humming with static electricity. And then she saw them, at least a dozen other people, all gathered in silence. Parents, siblings, people who had thought they were alone in their grief. Some clutched worn photographs. Others simply stood in stunned disbelief. One woman whispered, "I thought I was losing my mind. But you've seen it too." Then, a screen buzzed to life at the front of the room. A grainy video feed. A voice crackled through the speakers.
Calm.
Controlled. "You're here because you're finally ready to remember." Rachel's knees buckled. The room spun. On the screen, Olivia stepped forward, now clearly a teenager, poised, composed, and no longer just her daughter. She looked directly into the camera and said, "They're going to tell you I was taken, that I was a victim, but it's not the truth. We were chosen, all of us. And now we choose what happens next." Everything Rachel thought she knew collapsed in that instant. Her mission, her grief, even her love, twisted into a choice that would now define the future. Because Olivia wasn't lost anymore. She was leading them. Rachel's heart thundered as Olivia's face filled the screen. Gone was the lost little girl who once clung to her mother's leg in fear of thunder and strangers. This version of her was composed, unshaken, and speaking like someone who had memorized every word. We were chosen. Now we choose what happens next. The statement rang in Rachel's head like a bell tolling the end of something far greater than her personal tragedy. Around her, the other families stared in frozen horror. Some whispered their loved ones' names through trembling lips. Others stepped backward as if the sheer weight of the truth might crush them where they stood. Rachel didn't move. Her mind couldn't. All she could do was stare at her daughter's eyes, alive, aware, and yet, not quite her own. Before anyone could speak, the screen flickered, then cut to black. The room dropped into a cold, humming silence. And that's when the door behind them groaned open, and two men in suits entered. No visible weapons, no badges, just calm, deliberate expressions that immediately shifted the air. The taller of the two scanned the room and said, "No one's here to hurt you. But it's time you understand the full scope of this. You came here for answers, and we're willing to give them if you listen." The crowd didn't move. Neither did Rachel, until he looked straight at her and added, "Rachel, this all started with you." The name was a knife. Everyone turned. Rachel's chest tightened. She barely whispered, "What do you mean?" The man motioned her forward. "Your daughter wasn't taken. She was recruited. But that never would have happened if you hadn't submitted her name. Unintentionally, yes, but officially. On a government testing form. Remember that psychological aptitude survey from the pediatric trial 10 years ago? The one they told you was for child development research." Rachel's stomach turned to ice. She remembered it. She'd filled it out in a haze of exhaustion during one of Olivia's checkups. Just a few questions. Behavioral responses. Cognitive patterns. It didn't seem like anything at the time, but it had been everything. They led her down a dim corridor off the main room, into a chamber filled with monitors and thick files stacked like towers of forgotten truths. The agent handed her one labeled Echo, Subject Theta, 6, Olivia Monroe. Inside were pages of documentation, neuroevaluations, personality pattern tracking, behavioral modifications. Each page worse than the last. She's one of 6 who made it through all phases. High resilience, low emotional volatility, excellent memory suppression and recall adaptation, the agent said without blinking. Rachel fought the bile in her throat. "You brainwashed my daughter," she choked. He shook his head calmly. "No. We prepared her for survival. For influence. She wasn't the victim. She's the future. She backed away, trembling, but they didn't stop her. They didn't have to. Her mind was already tearing itself apart with questions she couldn't answer and realities she couldn't process. As she staggered back into the main hall, the others surrounded her. They were pleading now. Is it true? Did they take your daughter too? Did you know about this? Rachel didn't respond. She couldn't. Until one voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Rachel. It was Olivia. But this time, not through a screen. She stood at the far end of the room. In the flesh, no longer an image but a person, and yet still unfamiliar. Her presence commanded attention like a general returning from war. Rachel froze, 1,000 emotions clawing at her throat. Olivia stepped closer, slowly, each footstep echoing with eerie finality. I didn't come back to be rescued, she said. I came back to finish what we started. Rachel blinked through tears. We didn't start anything. They did. Olivia's eyes didn't flinch. You gave them the key. You just didn't realize it. Everything I've become, it's because of what they built around me. But what I choose to do now, that's mine. Her voice softened, just for a second. You came for answers. I came to decide who gets to hear them. And then the lights went out. A flash of movement. Screams. Rachel ducked instinctively as the sound of struggle erupted around her. A smoke grenade hissed in the corner, throwing gray fog across the room like a curtain. Through the haze, she saw Olivia grab a small device from her belt and slam it into the wall, an EMP charge. Every monitor, every sensor, every piece of tech went dead in a second. Chaos erupted. The agents shouted.
People fled.
Rachel tried to reach Olivia, but was blocked by the crush of terrified people pushing for exits. In the middle of it all, Olivia stood motionless, her eyes locked on Rachel through the thick fog. Then she vanished. When Rachel finally stumbled outside, the building was emptying. Police cars had arrived, but not the kind from the city. Federal black SUVs. Unmarked. Unsmiling. Hayes was there, restrained. So was Ethan. But Olivia was gone. Again. Like a shadow folding into the night. Rachel fell to her knees as one final agent approached her, not to arrest, but to hand her something. It was a phone. Only one file was on it. A video. Olivia's face appeared once more. You looked for the truth. You found it. But the truth was never the end. It's the beginning. There are more like me. More who are waiting to wake up. You can either expose it or control it. I'll be watching to see what you choose. And with that, the screen went black, again. But this time, Rachel wasn't sure who the villain was anymore. Rachel sat alone on the edge of a wide, empty pasture just outside the city, the kind of place where the world felt still for a moment. No agents, no flashing lights, no voices calling out for answers. Just wind through the grass and the fading scent of summer rain. It had been 4 months since that night. 4 months since Olivia vanished again. 4 months of interrogations, of names on screens, of half-truths wrapped in federal jargon that offered little comfort and even less accountability. The program had been officially dissolved, but that was only the public version. Rachel knew better now. She had seen too much, heard too much, lived through too much to believe the story would end simply because someone said it had. Still, for the first time in nearly a decade, she wasn't consumed by the weight of what she didn't know. Because while the world still buzzed with conspiracy theories and viral speculation, Rodeo Girl returns from secret government project, trending across YouTube, podcasts unraveling wild timelines, digital sleuths tracking subject theta 6 through blurry photos and grainy videos. Rachel finally understood something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to believe for years. Olivia was alive. Not just breathing, not just surviving, but living on her own terms. That knowledge, while complicated, had become a kind of peace she never expected. In the days following the EMP blackout, Rachel had been shuffled between government buildings and secret interviews, where every official tried to package her daughter into a controllable narrative. Some wanted her to say Olivia had been brainwashed, a danger to national security. Others urged her to say nothing at all, to protect what they called national integrity. But Rachel refused both versions. She chose her own truth. She gave one interview, just one, raw, honest, and terrifying in its clarity. She didn't name names. She didn't speculate. She only said what mattered, that Olivia had been taken into something bigger than any of them understood, molded into something unrecognizable, and yet, through it all, had left behind just enough of herself to give her mother hope. That video blew up online, racking up millions of views. People dissected every pause in her voice, every flicker in her expression. But no one could deny the authenticity. It didn't feel like a viral stunt. It felt like a wound that had finally been allowed to breathe. The comments poured in, mothers, fathers, siblings, strangers. So many stories of missing people, unsolved disappearances, and the nagging feeling that something darker was always working in the background. Rachel didn't respond to any of them. She just read, night after night, and wondered how many other Olivias were still out there, waiting to be seen. The ranch had been abandoned for years, owned by a friend who owed Rachel a favor. She had come out here with no plan, just a need to feel space again, to breathe something untouched by wires and surveillance. And maybe, on some level, to wait. That instinct was what kept her walking the fence lines every morning, checking the gate every night, and leaving the porch light on even when she knew no one would come. Until one day she did. No sound. No warning. Just a shadow at the edge of the pasture, the shape of a horse stepping slowly from the trees. Then a figure behind it.
Tall, lean, steady.
It was Olivia. Her hair was longer now, her posture stronger. But the moment their eyes met across the field, Rachel saw it, the flicker. The tiny flame that had always been there, even under years of programming and cold calculation. They didn't run to each other. There were no tears, no dramatic music swelling in the background. They just stood there, eyes locked, sharing the kind of silence only two people can share after living different lives through the same pain. Olivia spoke first. Just one sentence. I can't stay. Rachel nodded. I know. They talked for hours, into the night, their voices soft and steady, trading pieces of truth like puzzle fragments. Olivia didn't reveal everything. Some of it was too big, too dangerous, but she said enough. Enough for Rachel to know she was trying to dismantle the system from the inside. That she wasn't alone. That more were waking up. She hadn't come back for forgiveness, or even closure. She came to show her mother that she wasn't lost anymore. That her story hadn't ended in the woods, or on a monitor, or in the screams of a government facility.
It had just evolved.
By morning, she was gone again.
Just like that.
But this time, Rachel didn't feel empty. She felt ready. Ready to tell the world what she had seen. Not to expose Olivia or put her in danger, but to ask questions no one wanted to answer. She started a blog, then a podcast. She called it Echoes from the Forest. People listened. People shared. The story became bigger than just one missing girl. It became a lens through which others began to examine their own losses, their own questions. And the more people listened, the harder it became for the truth to stay buried. To this day, Rachel doesn't know where Olivia is. Sometimes she thinks she catches glimpses, on the edge of a protest photo, in a viral video, a silhouette at a political rally. But maybe that's enough. Maybe Olivia was never meant to come home in the way people expected. Maybe her home now was the resistance she was quietly building, brick by brick, in the shadows of a world still learning how to see. And as for Rachel, she learned that peace doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from knowing the questions you asked were the right ones. And somewhere out there, under a wide sky and the hush of trees, a daughter rides with purpose, watching, waiting, and shaping a future no one saw coming.